Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Martin Andrews, and welcome to today's webinar, Theory to Practice, Implementing High-Quality Instruction. We are so glad that you can join us. The webinar is part of our fall series, Rising to the Challenge, High-Quality Instruction in K-8 Social Studies, brought to you by inquirED and the National Council for the Social Studies. inquirED has created inquiry journeys, our elementary social studies curriculum, to move students and teachers beyond the textbook, supporting culturally responsive instruction, developing literacy and critical thinking skills, building deep social studies content knowledge, and giving teachers the tools they need for high quality instruction. It is also brought to you by the National Council for the Social Studies. The nation's largest social studies gathering is just weeks away in December. You should go. And when you do, come and see inquirED. We'll be at booth 309. It is a really wonderful weekend of connecting with social studies professionals across the country, attending workshops. So you're going to want to check that out. You can go to socialstudies.org/conference to find out more. And I am going to introduce our panelists for today. So John White serves as the Chief Success Officer of Great Minds. He works within the company and with its partner schools to research Great Minds' effectiveness, to provide professional learning to educators, to support school-level implementation, and much more. Before, John served as the Louisiana State Superintendent of Education, and over 8 years in that role, he developed nationally recognized efforts to unify the state's fragmented early childhood system, to modernize its curriculum, to professionalize the preparation of educators, and to provide pathways to prosperity for all high school graduates. John, thank you for joining us today. And Sarah Milo Hoskow serves as the head of partner experience at inquirED, where she oversees inquirED's implementation of our curriculum inquiry journeys. Before joining inquirED, Sarah worked in a range of classrooms, from early education to places around the country, California, Washington, even Chile. Thank you so much coming to us today, Sarah. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to dig right into some of these questions, but I think before we do that, what I would love to do is go back a little bit to our first webinar. In our first webinar, we met with Larry Berger, the co-founder and CEO of Amplify, and really discussed the power of high-quality instructional materials. And I think that for those participants joining us today, maybe some review would be good. So I'll go to you, John. And I know as the Louisiana Superintendent of Education, you really led the charge for the adoption of high quality instructional materials in Louisiana, but also you had a significant influence on the movement across the country. For our participants today, could you describe what makes a given curriculum a high quality instructional material?
Yeah, and by the way, I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir in this group here. I think our audience probably has a lot to say about this. Also, it's just awesome to be here. Thank you, Martin, for the invitation, and Sarah and Shanti and the whole team at inquirED. I mean, a lot of the answer to your question lies in the work that they're doing. It's incredibly refreshing to be here talking about high quality social studies, teaching and learning. So thank you for the invitation. You know, I think not saying anything anybody on this webinar doesn't know, but you have to look back on the kind of history of our industry of mass education in America and realize how uniquely problematic it is that we just spent decades talking about education reform, but not really ever quite talking about what kids learn between the hours of 8 and 4 every day. We talked about who the teachers were, we talked about the choices that parents had, but we didn't really talk about the stuff that kids were doing and learning and talking about in school every day. And part of the reason we weren't is because it was a foregone conclusion that it was pretty weak tea. I mean, it was a mess. and publishers were doing their work by just pulling together random bits of content, trying to match them with mishmash standards, and trying to put something in front of school systems that we would accept as reasonable. Meanwhile, none of us would look at it and say that it's as rich enough, it's coherent enough, that one segment, one body of knowledge builds on the next, that we have the appropriate structures to deal with students who are, for whatever reason, off track. These are the features of a high quality curriculum. And I think, Martin, it boils down to a simple question. What does it mean to be well educated? What does it mean to have had a quality education? It doesn't mean you're one day writing something about your summer vacation and the next day talking about elephants and the endangered species policies in Africa. It means coherence, it means depth, and it means growing your body of knowledge as you grow yourself. And that is what I think inquirED in principle, certainly Great Minds, and what we tried to do in Louisiana was all about.
Yeah, that sequence, that progression, that logic is so important. Yeah. Okay, well, I know that so at inquirED, at Great Minds, at other high quality providers across the country, creating the materials is a huge undertaking. Making sure that there's that progression, making sure that you have the supports that you need. But once you create those materials, you have to go to schools and help teachers implement them. And maybe that's a point for us to pull back. If I'm used to teaching out of a textbook, if I'm used to cobbling together my resources, as so many teachers do, when I start to implement a high quality instructional material, I think that there are probably ways that is a huge weight lifted off my shoulders, but there's also maybe other ways that it's challenging. So Sarah, I see you nodding your head. I'll go to you first for this question. What are the challenges and what are the opportunities that we face when we're asking schools to adopt high quality instructional materials? I guess more than adopt, implement high quality instructional materials.
Yeah, I think you started by talking about the teacher and the teacher who's no longer pulling this resource and that resource, that this curriculum is now providing this coherence over time, and we're expecting the teacher to do it. And I would layer on top of that, high quality instructional materials is not just what you're teaching and when, so you have that coherence, but it's how you're teaching it. It's the instructional practices that go with it. So high quality instructional materials include these instructional supports. And when we're using these high quality instructional materials, Larry Berger last week said, or in the last webinar said, we're adopting these because we have ambitious goals. We're expecting these high quality instructional materials in the hands of teachers to do big and different things for students, and for students to be able to do big and different things. And so that means we're asking for a shift. And I think whenever you're asking for a major shift, there has to be more than an adoption. There has to be a really strategic implementation. And that we need to think about, do we have the time for this? Are we setting aside the time to understand what this curriculum is and how we implement it? Are we sharing the vision across our district so that everyone knows why we're making this shift and is bought into it? Are we making sure that everyone has an entry point to this? We can't just put high quality instructional materials in front of teachers and expect them to know exactly what's in it. And so are we giving every teacher an entry point for where they are and the supports to learn it and grow along the way? So I think just really recognizing this ambitious thing that you're undertaking when you're adopting a high quality instructional material, and making sure you have the comprehensive supports around it and that they're going to last over time.
Yeah, and so John, I'd love for you to chime in as well, because that idea of adoption is the first step, but it's not over. And maybe districts and schools are used to saying, we bought the textbooks, our job is done. Like, we set that up and teacher, go ahead and do that. What is the shift that at Great Minds and even in your work in Louisiana that you saw the need for in terms of implementation support?
Well, there's a lot to say, and I agree with everything that Sarah said. I guess I would add maybe two things. First, I think that we in the high quality curriculum industry oftentimes confuse our users, who are really people in schools, with our customers, who are really primarily, not entirely, but largely school systems. And I would say first, and I say this as a card-carrying bureaucrat, educrat, it's really at that level where things start getting screwed up. And we have to be honest about that especially when you're talking about the huge systems, but smaller rural and suburban systems have their challenges of their own. It's at the systems level where the principles that you articulated earlier, Martin, coherence, for example, and how the teacher and the student ultimately experience coherence gets messed up when the capabilities or the directives or the rules or whatever it is that are coming out of central office, as they cascade down through the different verticals coming out of central office to the principal, to the people who then are the coaches at the school level. I know we have many here today. It's in that chain of directives and structures and processes that oftentimes things end up with teachers not being set up for success. They're getting contradictory messages. They don't have the time or the process or the support that one would need to actually fulfill the complete mandate of the curriculum or the possibility of the curriculum. And by the way, that's an easy thing to say. Just to put a fine point on, I'd say that's the overwhelming majority of cases out there. I mean, overwhelming majority of implementations are characterized by incoherence, because for whatever reason, all of the people who are in a position to influence the teacher's ultimate behaviors are not yet in a position or are not on the same page, essentially. Secondly, so then there's the question, could you hire an inquirED or a Great Minds or whoever else to resolve that issue? Could they step in and provide that? And I'm sure that our discussion, as it always does, Martin, will go in this direction. But the challenge, of course, is you're talking about 75,000 schools. I mean, you're talking about a huge scale, and that it is one thing to think about, yes, a Great Minds being in there to be embedded with your PLCs, to be providing one-to-one or one-to-small group coaching, to be doing kind of annual content and knowledge building refresh workshops, what have you. It's one thing to be saying, yeah, we'll do that. We'll use our Title II funds and we'll bring in an outside group to do that. But when you think about the question of scale, I think probably the big challenge for a group like us, certainly for states like Louisiana, is not just questions of how do you kind of consult and cohere with your customer, but also ultimately, how do you address the issue of small school systems, the economies of which do not support ultimately the sort of intensive consulting interventions that I was just describing? And how does the product and the support systems work to help them implement, knowing that it is their capabilities and not outside capabilities that need to be relied on?
So the onus of responsibility, I heard, it lies on a school district for that coherent flow, but also it's never going to be solved, right? Because it strictly by the school system, that there is something responsible that inquirED is responsible for, that Great Minds, that other curriculum providers are responsible for, to try to bake in some of the supports that someone might need. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? Like, if I'm a small rural school, Great Minds isn't going to travel, inquirED isn't going to travel to that space and help and sit down with that PLC, because on that scale, it's impossible. So is there almost like a technological way that schools can be supported in implementation? Sarah, I don't know if I can throw this over to you. Like, is there a way in which technology can help us maybe connect smaller schools across the country or something like that to help in the implementation?
Well, I want to back up. I think I completely agree with John that, like, none of our companies can go manage your implementation. So what we like to think about at inquirED is, how do we support a district, our partner districts, not solving the whole problem across the United States, but our partner districts. How do we help support the strategic implementation, not as if we are managing it, but as if we are moving the district to independence in managing their strategic implementation over time? And with our smaller districts, you're right, like our single site partners, like maybe we cannot show up for all of them, but what we want to do is provide the frameworks for that type of planning and thinking, and then the resources to address their needs. And so, making sure that districts, if they are, that they can identify where are teachers struggling with this high quality and curriculum, and then help provide the supports to the teachers using resources we can provide. Or they can identify what is falling down here is that coherence through our district, where we understand at the central office what our goals are, and we're providing some PD to teachers, but teachers are caught in the middle if their principals aren't on board. And so we want to help move our partner districts to diagnose and address those pieces of the implementation strategy where it might be falling down. And strategic implementation is like teaching, where like you write your plan and then you're constantly reevaluating your plan and making moves to keep progressing towards your goals. So there is no one single plan that could be used across every district. And even the best laid plan is like, you have to formatively assess constantly and think about, where is this falling down and what moves can we make to kind of pull that coherence back together.
Yeah, and I think that last point, I think, Sarah, is so well summarizes what I think the great opportunity is and the great challenge. I mean, I think the state of professional learning, and by the way, the inquirED team is terrific at talking this through, is just not caught up to what the evidence shows us are the real challenges. I'm all for teachers having in-services, teachers having pre-service days to really go deep into the inner workings of a curriculum and just workshop that for 6 hours or for a whole week and what have you. But the needs of both the teacher and certainly the needs of the administrative group are something that is ultimately needs to be much more bespoke, much more custom. And also, I think most important to what Sarah says, needs to be grounded in what's actually working and what's actually not. And I think if I think about kind of the typical industry player, they may be saying all the right things, they may be providing all the right sessions, but it is very rare that they're feeding back good information about what's working and what's not, and helping their partners to make that adjustment. And I think that last thing that Sarah said along those lines really characterizes what, to my mind, is the right sort of partnership, challenges of scale notwithstanding.
What's a success story? I'm curious about a district. Like, you don't have to name the district, but like, what is the success story of, man, this district had these things in place and it just went as well as we could expect, or something that we can look toward. We know that these are the kind of most essential components. I know, listening to both of you, it sounds like there are so many places that it could go awry. You could have it together at central office, the teachers could be ready for it, and a building principal could be the part that needed more support. But is there a recipe for success that you've seen out there that you could share for those district leaders that are on this call right now, thinking about curriculum implementation? What are the things that you've seen in the past that have been successful? And John, I'll go to you first, and I'm just curious, either as in Louisiana or in your work at Great Minds.
Yeah, well, I'll name one just off the top of my head because I was just talking about them, and that's Lincoln Parish, Louisiana, which is a sort of a mid-sized rural and urban district in North Louisiana between Monroe, Louisiana, and Shreveport. And they are a PhD science customer, which is one of the ones, but I got to know them most with their work of ELA guidebooks, which was a Learn Zillion product at the time. an OER product. And what I saw in their approach, first of all, is a commitment to longevity. I think it is so important to know that it is the kind of ephemeral nature of these commitments is where the foundation starts getting shaky. This is a decade-long commitment to a curriculum if you're really owning it in the right way. And their leadership at a superintendent level has been invested. Secondly, he at the time, and now she, clarifying roles around really who is leading the implementation, and then assuring that at every level, there are the structures to assure that the same message and the same vision for success, the same organizing, the look-fors, are being communicated and are embraced at every level. And so anchoring the implementation in a sense of what change are we actually looking for in the classroom, and having the ability, as Sarah named, to measure that matter deeply. And then the structures that go across schools and within schools that go across classrooms to assure daily learning that is curriculum specific. And I can't say enough how still today, so much professional learning that teachers receive is random. It's pulling teachers out of their context rather than keeping the learning in the context, and it's not specific to the curriculum. The curriculum, if it's a good one, is a commitment to a platform for change. It's the foundation atop which your plan for professional growth exists. And therefore, the thought that you would do a whole bunch of professional learning on stuff that isn't even ancillary, but is completely extraneous to the curriculum just makes no sense. And yet that is how many, many schools and many districts are still spending their time. So I think it's a commitment to longevity, a commitment to coherence, a commitment to embedding the daily learning and making it curriculum specific across different groups of players within the system, all the way down to the school and classroom level. That's what has characterized their work. And as Sarah so well said earlier, being real with when things aren't working. And, it is frustrating. You're in the first year, the second year of an implementation, and you walk in and teachers aren't getting through the lesson. They're not getting through the unit. They're looking for the wrong problems in the problem set. Whatever it is, these are frustrating things. But if you're gathering the right facts, you have the ability to adjust, to course correct, and you've given yourself the time over a period of months and years to make the course correction and make it work. And Lincoln is just one example of a district that I've seen do that very, very well.
Sarah, I'd love for you to chime in too.
Yeah, I have a couple districts in mind. I think I love this framing of longevity, and I want to think that it starts before your adoption, before you're even seeking a curriculum, because the idea is that the curriculum should be answering that bold call to action of what we want for students. And so it starts before then. And yes, it continues. That I agree with that completely. So I'm thinking of districts who were able to think about, how do we have this bold vision in the beginning? And then how do we support it over time through those intensive first implementation years, where we are making sure that everyone's aware, bought in, trying it, getting over those first barriers, because the beginning is hard, and still having the supports for that long term that John's talking about. And I think about Instruction Partners has a series of conditions that they say need to be present for impactful professional development. And I would say they need to be present for impactful curriculum implementation as well. So really making sure that within your context, you can have enough time, you have the time set up, you have the processes for spreading information, for unpacking the curriculum, for assessing, is it working, and where do we want to make tweaks, whether that's in the outcomes for students or just the transferring of information from the district and what the curriculum is to the teachers. So making sure you have all these pieces for success in place, and you're looking at what exists, where I see it working best is looking for what already exists in my district or my school system that I can build on. What structures are successful? So if you have a really strong instructional coaching model, thinking about how you leverage that. Instead of layering something else in, you're thinking about how you leverage what is working. If it's a large district and there is like really powerful regional models for, you know, collaboration and working together, and maybe visitations across schools, leveraging those. And so what I see, the couple things that I think have been true across our successful partners, and a couple in Iowa are coming to mind, is from the very early vision through the full implementation, initial implementation, all the way into the sustain phase, having the conditions and supports in place that are leveraging what the district or school system already know to be successful in their context.
That makes a lot of sense. That longevity, it's interesting, you know, that generally it's like 7 to 10 years you do a curriculum adoption. The reality is adopting a curriculum means if you actually committed for those 7 to 10 years to implementing and working on implementation, that time period makes a lot of sense from what I'm hearing. I think both of you are probably have used this word before, fidelity. When we're talking about implementation, people have a range of reactions to that word, and maybe use it, maybe you don't. How does that for you as the Chief Success Officer at Great Minds or the Head of Partner Experience at inquirED, what does that word mean to you, and how does it shape your efforts to implement curriculum? That word fidelity. Either of you can just chime in about that.
Well, I think when we throw that word around, I think those of us in this, you know, sort of business often mean, are the teachers doing the things that I, as the curriculum writer, wanted them to do? You know, are they using the curriculum as intended? And I think that is it's important, in my view, that a company like Great Minds or inquirED, to be successful, have a shared definition with their partners of what fidelity looks like. And yes, it should be grounded in what the curriculum is meant to manifest in the classroom. So no concern with that. I do think that it is important that in doing that, we not overstate the kind of brilliance of the curriculum and undervalue nuts and bolts issues that are hard about teaching. And that can be things that are, you know, like any user's manual, you want to make it, or owner's manual, you want to make it as easy as possible for the user to use your product well. And I do think that I've seen a lot of highly, you know, very well-intended curriculum writers talking about fidelity in terms of using the curriculum as intended, and maybe not take a kind of teacher's lens in the content and design of the PD, in terms of let's start with kind of first order issues, how to use the curriculum, how to navigate the technology, pacing issues, addressing scaffolds in ways that aren't just kind of cloaked in rhetoric, but actually get into the reality of how we deal with diverse learners. And so I love the idea of fidelity as a principle, but I do get a little kind of frustrated sometimes when people throw that word out there and talk about using the curriculum as intended, when it means really not kind of meeting the teacher where he is, and addressing the issues that sometimes aren't so lofty as fidelity, but just make using a product really hard.
Yeah, I think I do think it's important to talk about using a curriculum as it's designed, but knowing that there is tight and loose within that. That's a term that someone recently used with me, and I thought it was just a really great term. So what is tight about using this curriculum, and where can I have some looseness? Where can I have some play? I'm thinking about one of those things that you're talking about, John, that like teachers, like this is the reality of teachers. Let's talk about instructional time. I don't have time to get through this whole lesson, and it's written with a complex, discussion protocol for my students. Can I change it to a turn and talk this time? Yes, that is not breaking fidelity or breaking the curriculum as it was designed, as long as students are having the opportunity to collaborate, discuss, all of that. But if you never let your students discuss, well, then you're losing the opportunities for collaboration and discussion. Or if you do something different, if you break something by saying, I'm just going to take out all the disciplinary vocabulary and put in words my students already know. Now you're losing the intention behind the curriculum. And what's tricky about this is the teacher needs to understand the intention behind the design to know what is tight and loose. And that's where the longevity and that's where the ongoing professional development is really important. So once you get past exactly like you said, like, how do I use this? Where do I click? How do I access my curriculum? We need to be talking more about the why behind this. What are we hoping this is doing for students? What are students doing that is going to, impact their outcomes? And why does the lesson plan support that? And the teacher moves within that lesson plan support that, so that I can know if I change this piece, am I breaking the design or the intention? And it's okay that if teachers in the first few years maybe are making some choices that after using the curriculum for some time and engaging in that curriculum-based professional development, that professional development that is rooted in the curriculum, they start to make different choices. That is the progress toward using the curriculum as intended, because we want them to be able to make the choices they need to make to fit in their instructional time or whatever else they're adjusting.
Yeah, I mean, that is so well said. And it speaks, I think, to something that we haven't talked as much about here, which is the obligation of the school leader and the school leadership team to share in that understanding of the curriculum and its design as it's intended to be used. Because a misunderstanding of fidelity on the part of the leadership team, in our experience, can result in such kind of perverse incentives for the teachers, out of all of the best intentions, but just a poor understanding, a weak understanding of what fidelity means, can disrupt for a teacher the whole implementation. And I can't say enough about what Sarah said, with just a quick echo to the importance of school leadership going through the same process.
Yes, I completely agree. We've been talking about this coherence, that the burden can't just be on the teacher. It has to be across the whole system of understanding what are we doing and why. Why are we taking this time? Why are we making this effort? And why are we as teachers or our students going through this productive struggle with this more complex learning experience than what we were asking before?
That's what last week when we asked Larry about high quality instructional materials, he talked about when you're going through an adoption, how important a pilot could be to that. You would never pilot a textbook, in the old instructional materials model, but with a high quality instructional material, it seems like that gives the opportunity to do exactly what you're both talking about, is that the leadership needs to understand how this works and why it works and what you're trying to do. And maybe having a pilot or a chance to really dig into that would allow for that knowledge building. I don't know. I know inquirED does pilots. I don't know if Great Minds does, but in terms of the adoption of these, is that a shift? Are there other shifts that need to be made, like at the adoption level, even before implementation?
I can say I don't know that I called it a huge shift recently, but it's certainly, we get this request, I think maybe modestly increasingly, and I think it's a great thing. And where we have the chance to engage in a year-long or even sometimes 2-year-long dialogue with a potential partner in the context of them looking at other things. I'll just say that for us, the learning. I mean, that in some sense, that's really where, Martin, we get our greatest learning, I think, is in those moments of kind of trial and learning in a real context. So I love when you see districts or other partners taking this process so seriously as to go through it. I would also say that it creates a context for rigorous research that I think is, unfortunately, it's sort of in the backdrop, but I think since the pandemic has been very much disrupted. And I think it's worth just a quick note on the role of research here, because the truth of it is, as an intervention unto itself, curriculum's kind of history in quantitative research is not great. Because, and why is that? I think it's principally because you can't divorce curriculum from implementation. The intervention is the implemented curriculum, not just the curriculum kind of dropped in. And so a pilot is a chance for not just learning in the general sense, but learning in a very specific sense. What's working? Let's actually test what is working, and let's go with what works, and let's commit to it. So both for that reason, as well as just for the learning that comes of it for us, highly support that move.
Yeah.
I think there's also learning that comes of it for the district. I think they start to experience that shift, both the positive pieces of it, the engagement for students, the student learning, but also the other parts of the shift, like teachers having to shift their practice or carve out a little more time, or whatever the other shifts are that the district is going to have to prepare for in that strategic implementation. They start to get a taste of that, and they can start to plan for that when they really do implement across the whole system.
Yeah. Both of you have talked about the importance of what we'll call curriculum-based professional learning. And the research has been around about curriculum-based professional learning for 30 years, maybe more. And yet, when I was a teacher, I never experienced it. And I think maybe some of our teachers some of our attendees probably haven't experienced curriculum-based professional learning. If the research supports it, what's the obstacle to a curriculum-based professional learning model? Like, what's getting in the way? Is it just this is the way we've always done it, and we're going to continue to do it? But are there other things, other obstacles that we can identify that are getting in the way of that?
I think having professional development resources or tools. Sometimes it's not, I want to broaden professional development from thinking it's just like a session. I want to think about professional development as, a really collaborative classroom visitation with my instructional coach around a practice I'm trying to improve. So, but I think one of the challenges of like really high quality curriculum-based professional learning is having the resources to support the thing I want to learn that is deeply tied to my curriculum. So we want to make sure that we have tools and reflection tools that will help me not just I'm thinking about differentiation strategies. We could go to a full day PD session on differentiation strategies. And that's, I think, what you were referring to, John, where it's like, it doesn't even feel connected. It's like this idea of layering something on top of everything I'm expected to do, as opposed to a professional development session that is thinking about what are differentiation strategies that I am seeing already embedded in my curriculum, and thinking about my students and what other strategies I might employ with my curriculum. So this is this bringing together of the learning and the application. And if you don't have resources and tools that are designed to go with your curriculum, someone has to cobble that together. And then you get into a time challenge or a capacity or a knowledge challenge. And so making sure that you have those professional development resources that are actually grounded in the curriculum, and the application is going to be authentic to the curriculum and the lessons you're instructing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I guess I would call that kind of the supply side challenge to Martin, what you're talking about, yes, which I think is spot on. Like, I don't think that the industry has done what Sarah is describing. And consequently, and I think we are in a little bit of a loop. The contract says you got 6 in-services. So what does said company do? They do a bunch of in-service content, and then you get, it's not just the curriculum company that's doing it. It's the socio-emotional learning company. It's the, as you said, it's the differentiation company. It's the, everybody's got their workshops and they're all getting sold. And so I think on the supply side, Sarah's right. Those of us who have an HQIM view are obligated to do something far beyond what's been done in the past. I think on the demand side, though, I don't want to let those of us in the system off the hook. This is a leadership question. And the truth of it is, and somebody put this, a comment related to this in the chat. I mean, the truth of it is, and Sarah got at this, it sort of starts with time. Are you serious about making the time for routine in your school or in your school system for routine, high quality, well facilitated, coherent, spiraled professional learning for your adults, not for your kids? I mean, as much for your kids. And if the leadership of the system hasn't said this is a priority in which I'm going to invest my budget, my time, our people, then A, they're not doing the job of a good school system manager. But B, you're going to get the kind of randomness and the scattered, every little agenda, everybody's got their hands in the cookie jar kind of in-service environment that has too often characterized American education. And when you hear, people trot out the Singapores and the Finlands and everything, but the truth of it is, when you're in those places, the thing that they principally have in common, I guess a small handful of other things, is the seriousness with which they take the time that our adults are given to one another. And what better way to anchor that time that adults have together than the robust materials that have been developed to support students every day? So I guess I would say that if you had to wave a magic wand, I would wave it in the direction of leadership taking this more seriously than I think in our country we historically have.
Yeah, and that's a comment we even saw in the chat, was this all sounds great, but not with the time I have allotted. If it can't be done if there's not structural support for it. Yes, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that's where it comes, you got to start thinking about this the year before your adoption. It's got to, you as a district leader, and I think it's incredibly hard in the social studies. I don't think there is as much time allotted to the social studies for professional development for social studies. But you want to establish this case as much as you can with the time to grab that time or those resources, or to integrate it into the coaching system or whatever it is, because the adoption of the curriculum alone, without the opportunities for teachers to unpack it and reflect on their practice, is going to be really challenging.
One thing, just to name this, when I talk to coaches or department heads, the head of math in a given district, the head of social studies, what I hear most is district leaders needing to go to their managers and advocate for time and advocate for financial resources. And they do it on the basis of, is it working? Yeah. And I do think that, and I don't think we yet have evolved to a point where we are really able to say this, but we're working on it. There's a question of, how do you help your district partners who want to do the right thing represent that if superintendent or if chief academic officer, if we do this, if we invest in this way, it will work. We have evidence that it is working. And I do think it's incumbent upon us who are solution providers to ask, how are we helping our allies within school systems to make the case to leadership that this is an investment that they must make, something they must take seriously.
And someone in the chat said, do you have suggestions on how to address this with higher leadership and our district leaders? That is the question, to get the conversation started, making it a positive conversation. And Kinsey, I would say that, bringing up I think we'll share in the blog post some resources around curriculum-based professional learning. There's a great report from the Carnegie Corporation called The Elements that's looking at this. And maybe it starts with that discussion about what is the most effective way that you do professional learning. And there is research, and it starts as a conversation, knowing that the solution, that changing minds might take a while, but maybe that's a way to start the conversation at least. A few more questions and we're running out of time. I really appreciate the conversation so far. So I think that what I would like to do now is just maybe ask if I didn't ask this, I don't belong in a webinar in 2023. So if I didn't ask about some sort of role of technology, AI, what's happening out there in the field in terms of incorporating technology into our solutions, artificial intelligence being a specific one. Is there a role? Because a lot of times and I feel like I'm on the right webinar with the right two people. A lot of times we hear about AI being used, like how are we going to get students using it in their papers when they're in high school? How do we address that? Or what are ways that it can students can be, working on a computer and it can coach you like they're doing on Khan Academy right now. But I think for two people who think so much about supporting teachers, is there a way that AI can help us support teachers during a curriculum implementation? Have you begun to think about that? What are the potential? What are the possibilities? I'll put it out there.
I have been thinking about this. I recently asked our team, our partner experience team, if you could be next to every teacher while they're using inquiry journeys, what would you do for them? And what came up, many things. When someone was like, I'd do their photocopies. And yes, we would do that. But it was to be that prompter of reflection for a teacher, to help them read a lesson plan, internalize that, unpack it, ask questions. Where is my student going to struggle? And then have the teacher teach, and then prompt reflection again. And so I think we think of AI as being like delivering information, but I think there's potential for it to be very Socratic, to be asking the teacher, what do you want to be working on? Well, I want to be working on having my students ask more questions. What are you doing right now to have your students? The kind of conversation, I don't think anything can replace a coach, but I think that we can use it to prompt questioning and getting teachers to unpack their thinking a little bit. I also think there are some really interesting things out there. There's something called TeachFX, which is an audio tool that can record the audio at a classroom and then give you feedback on things like how many questions did you ask versus statements that you made, or how much teacher talk was there versus student talk. So when we're talking about teacher practice and teachers trying to unpack their practice, I think there are some really interesting things that are not AI just delivering information, but helping teachers either unpack a lesson, think about their students in a new way, really think about how does this lesson, how will it work with my students, and really think about the humans in their class, or reflect on some teaching. What is some data telling me about how I implemented this lesson? Mm-hmm. So I think there are a lot of really exciting ways we can do it that enhance and enable the teacher as the instructor and as a really important part of the classroom.
Yeah, can't argue with that. And I have to say, I do think, Sarah, that it is a really refreshing kind of shift in the industry, Martin, to not be in so much where I think we were 10 years ago, which was like, oh, this algorithm is going to change the way that the kid is thinking and experiencing, and the classroom is structured, and it felt all a little bit too much to be believed. And of course it was, in a way. And I think the notion that the teacher remaining a kind of human mediating force of the learning, assisted by technology, enhanced by technology with new capabilities, is an inspiring idea. I really liked what Lawrence Holt wrote in Medium this summer, in case any of you had a chance to read it. Lawrence, which is Laurence, and used to be at Amplify, and wrote I thought, a terrific, very generous, fact-driven kind of analysis of where does the technology right now most interface with, say, teachers' needs, as Sarah described it, and where does it not, and where could it? And it was just a wonderful mapping that has taught me a lot, and he certainly taught me a lot about this issue. That said, two things. First, I think we should not overstate, and I think Sarah's comments were appropriately modest, that we have any indication that learning is going to be accelerated or improved by the technology as it exists today, or even by the commercial markets in terms of where they're going and how they will utilize the technology. Meaning, I think the lessons we've learned about education technology, we should take a sort of a hint of skepticism with all of the rhetoric. And secondly, I don't want to forget about the benefits that we're deriving from more analog technologies, just like, for example, the ability to digitize content. And I think that, we went from a place where all of our professional learning was being delivered digitally to now a time when districts are requesting almost all of it to be done in person. And that both of those answers don't feel right. This has nothing to do with algorithms, and certainly nothing to do with artificial intelligence, but it does have to do with modality. And I do think if we want to do the work that the three of us have been talking about today at greater scale, we do need to think about technology in a fuller sense, and about the business problems and the problems of practice that it can help us solve, whether it's sophisticated artificial intelligences or if it's just putting stuff online. And I feel like kind of getting back after the pandemic, at least we have really corrected. I felt our district partners have really corrected and have wanted that getting back to face-to-face work together. But I think, we should think about the good lessons that we learned during that time, and how we can appropriately scale and gain other benefits through technologies that are more rudimentary.
I want to bring in a couple questions, and then I have one final thing I want to follow up on. So one question is, how important is collaboration across district leadership in the process of implementation? That was one question we had. And I can throw that out for either of you.
I think I have a question. I think I'm interpreting that as like the district leader with,
i.e. different content supervisors.
Yes. Okay. I think it's really important. I think that right now we are in a tug of war for time and resources, and that there is more that unifies the high quality instructional materials in different content areas than divides it. So, we want to make sure that we can amplify the strategies that are being used across different disciplines, and that when teachers are doing that curriculum-based professional learning, it doesn't have to be, how am I asking questions in social studies and then not thinking about how I'm asking questions in ELA or science. So I think the more we can, that goes back to that coherence. Hopefully we're choosing instructional materials across disciplines that want similar things of our students. Yes, they should be developing the disciplinary skills of that discipline, but they should be doing the critical thinking, the collaboration, all of that should cross. And so I think more that district leaders can find the unifying pieces of the curriculum, the more we can reduce the burden on the teacher. So that's one thing that comes to mind. And then there are probably many other things that John's going to talk about.
No, I'll second what you have to say, and I'll throw in one that's much more simplistic than what you so well said, which is, why are the buying decisions of different district content area leaders so separate from one another? I mean, I recognize they're on different cycles, but as a district and state person myself, this has always mystified me to some extent. I think the answer is that no district leader, I say this having been one of them, should have much faith that the publishing community itself has a particular kind of coherence across the subject matter. But I think the good news is that has changed. And, for us, for example, our science curriculum speaks directly to our humanities curriculum. I mean, in very intentionally designed ways. PhD science speaks to wit and wisdom. And when you layer in then a decodable readers or geodes implementation with wit and wisdom alongside a partner like Foundations, you're talking about then a huge percentage of a child's day being taken up with curriculum that was literally designed for mutually reinforcing the skills and bodies of knowledge. That is an incredibly powerful concept. And in the hands of a primary grade teacher, and in that case in particular, an incredibly accelerating basis on which to plan a day. So I think districts should be keyed in around that, because I think it's possible now in ways that 10 years ago I would not have said was the case.
And I think you're talking about the what the students are learning, speaking to each other, and I fully agree with that. I think there's also the how I use the curriculum, and I hear so many district leaders say, this is our year for social studies, but next year is ELA. So we have to get all the professional development in this year. And like those buying cycles are making it so that we can't have that longevity that John brought up at the very beginning. But if we can start to think about how the how is reinforcing as well, then we can say like, well, this is my year to implement social studies for the first year, but as we're on, rolling out ELA, we're going to look at how these two curricula speak to each other.
Yeah.
So I think it's the what and the how.
That's great. I want to follow a final question I have for you both is, I usually end a webinar just to ask what's something that you're jazzed about, what's something that you're reading now or exploring. It can be in the world of education, it can be outside of the world of education, that gives you hope, that is inspiring you. So John, I'll go to you first. What's something that you're jazzed about right now? Oh, I think you're muted.
This is going to sound hokey, but I think I am taking great inspiration these days from reading my local newspaper, and maybe this is a something to say in the context of a social studies curriculum. We have a wonderful local paper in New Orleans called the Times-Picayune that has a full front page of local news. And whatever you think about global affairs and domestic affairs right now, the nationalization of public policy and social issues has, I think, created a sense of kind of fantasy and people being removed and people being able to contribute and people belonging to something that in a local community like the city where I live couldn't be further from the truth. But you do need to be plugged in. You do need to build knowledge about your community and what's going on and how you do plug in. And so whenever I need a kind of antidote to the intractable challenges of the world, I read about my own town.
I might be even hokier. I'm talking about my 9-year-old. I have 3 kids. My 9-year-old is in 4th grade, and she has been given the opportunity to take action and have an impact on her school community a couple different ways this year. And to see how that motivates her, how it lights her up, how that's what she wants to talk about when she's going to bed, and how that is what gets her back to school. It really makes me excited and really makes me think about how having students have opportunities to do real work in school, how important that is. So I've been pretty jazzed about that.
Awesome. Great. Well, I was jazzed about this webinar, and it definitely fulfilled my my expectations. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And I'll follow up with participants with a blog post. I'll share some of the resources that we talked about. But John, thanks for joining us.
It was great to be here.
And Sarah, thank you as well.
Thanks. This was a great conversation and good to
All
see
right.
you, John.
Take
Likewise.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.